Who is the master? Shonuff of Harlem. Okay, no. Okay. He's called the rich man. To say the man is rich in antiquity is to evoke a social code. He's always expected to act in ways inimical to peasant interests. For Jesus to tell his peasant audience a story about a rich guy will immediately generate a guarded reaction. Calling someone rich in antiquity usually meant having the power to take from someone weaker what was rightfully, justly theirs by force. Thus, being rich was often synonymous with being greedy. That's a good rule of thought. Almost every time you see the word rich in the Bible, rich man, scratch it out, the greedy man. In antiquity, all peasants assumed that all rich people were greedy thieves. So the rich man or master is probably someone who fails to be a patron, a patron, a godfather, and is instead greedy. Very Mediterranean concept. In the mind of a Mediterranean peasant, the rich ranked low on the honor scale. But, of course, in their own minds, the rich ranked very high on the honor scale. The reaction would be, if Jesus is telling a story about a rich guy, oh, here's another account of one of those greedy SOBs. Watch out. Gotta hear another story about one of those bastards. Okay, the steward. Cato the Younger writes extensively about the duties of stewards in his De Agricultura. Writes Cato, the overseer, steward, must not be a gadabout. He must keep the servants busy and see that the master's orders are carried out. He must extend credit to no one without orders from the master. He must make up accounts with the master often. He must not hire the same day laborer or servant or caretaker for longer than a day. Remember that? Mm-hmm. He must not want to make any purchases without the knowledge of the master, nor want to keep anything hidden from the master. He must have no hangers-on. Continues later. He must be the first out of bed and the last to go to bed. The expectations of stewards were severe, intense. Stewards were part of the retainer class. They were employed by the urban elite, subject to constant scrutiny and rigid demands to produce a profit. As go-betweens mediating both absentee landowners and peasant tenant farmers, they were also subject to constant backstabbing and malicious gossip by debtors and tenants. A good rumor could be used to utterly destroy a steward. The debtors cannot be small holders in this story. The amount of debt tells us this. 100 cores of wheat equals 8 half-share rent for 200 acres, 20 times the usual peasant family lot. So these debtors are not peasants, are they? No peasant owned 200 acres. Freeholder, begonia, or tenant farmer, either one. 200 acres. 10 acres held by a peasant would have been a really well-off peasant. Most of the plots were 1 to 6 acres. 100 containers of oil, that's 3,500 liters, implies an exceedingly large olive grove, especially if a tenant lease in which the tenant retains half. So this is not a story about a steward interacting with peasants, is it? Who then is he interacting with? Who had that kind of money? Merchants. The merchants and the traders had that kind of money. These people also were held in antiquity to be greedy thieves. They were not allowed to reside within the city walls, no matter how wealthy they were. They were considered crooked by everyone, elites, stewards, and peasants. This is more likely the situation, and more likely that the debtors in the story are merchants and traders instead of being poor peasant tenant farmers. The size of their debt would have equaled the cumulative debt of an entire village. So what's at stake in the actions of this story? What cultural expectations or codes would the parable evoke? For peasant hearers, for the elite, that the master is rich is obvious. He has a steward and debtors on a very large scale. It's lucrative. But to say that he is rich, as the story does, is to evoke a social code in antiquity. Peasants in Jesus' audience would immediately assume this story is about a guy who will act contrary to their benefits and interests. It would thus turn the audience against this character. I'm going to tell you a story about a rich man because rich man means greedy, bad guy. Okay, you're going to tell me a story about an evil guy. Don't like it. We cannot be certain about Jesus' audience reaction to the steward, however. However, peasants certainly didn't like stewards. We have to note that he is the one person in the rich man's household with whom merchant wholesalers or tenants would have had first-hand experience. Jesus' audience probably would have reacted negatively to the steward as well as to the master. The parable tells us that news of the steward's mismanagement had been brought to the master's attention. Whether the steward was always fair or unscrupulous, we're not certain. Perhaps his unjust dealings were the cause of the public complaints. But the story does report that others tell the master of the steward's mismanagement or dishonesty. Now it's a matter of public comment. This creates an immediate dynamic that Western commentators about which have never taken account because they fail to recognize it. You see, in our culture, if someone comes to a CEO with many managers under her and says, they're messing up your profits, or they're stealing, or they're destroying your company, what would be the reaction of your peers if you were that CEO? Would you lose face to your peers if you allowed people under your employ to do that to your company? It would reflect bad on you. Who is now on trial? Your stewards or you?
Now that you know you are.
What the stewards do.
Well, here's the thing, Evelyn. The CEO, because she is being put to the test to see if she really is good at her business or not. So now, is this really a story about the steward being on trial? So another social code is being evoked. If the master has someone under his employ that he cannot control as a Mediterranean man, then his honor as master is at stake. He looks like a fool in front of his peers. The gossip network spreads everywhere. All subordinates, sons, daughters, wives, agents, were always embedded in the honor of the paterfamilias. Right? Far more than just the master's money is at stake. His social standing has been challenged. So what is really at stake here? It's not the steward who is on trial, but the master in a court of public opinion, whether he knows it or not. Okay. It's great that he knows it, because now he can take action, which he does. The gossip network is questioning whether he will act. something must be done to rescue his reputation. Westerners cannot fathom this. In this culture, honor means far more than wealth. This culture, the Middle East. Can United States people grasp that? Not really. In the Middle East, people will give away all of their money just to have a little bit of honor. That's how important honor is. They will do whatever is necessary to gain a little honor in the eyes of their peers. If this master were to lose honor in the eyes of the public, he would basically be destroyed. Punishment of the steward is not the central issue any longer, but the recovery of the honor of the master.
So he lost honor by having a steward that he wasn't holding accountable and keeping track of?
Whether or not the steward was a great steward or a crappy steward, public opinion was he was a crappy steward. That doesn't look bad so much on the steward as it does 100-fold on the master. As pater familias, he must be absolutely dominating and controlling of his household.
Because I've learned you do something, the act you do is bad, even the intention when you do it is good.
Sure.
Suppose I steal to feed an homeless.
Sure.
That is stealing which is bad. Even though the action I'm doing feeding that homeless is good, this is stealing. How come now? Where is that man?
Well, even the Catholic tradition, we have a very nuanced understanding of theft. If you look at actually what we teach about theft, especially when it comes to terms with, and all sin really, because we're talking about moral actions, we're talking about the subjective intention, we're also talking about the relative circumstances, and we're talking about the objectivity of the act itself. We're not so, well, you know, this is a wrong act in every degree in every single thing. No, the gravity of the act depends on all three of these things working in tandem. But in the case of the Middle East and the world of the Bible, I want you to understand sin is seen very differently than it is in later moral theology. You want to know what sin is in the Bible everywhere? Hamatria, to miss the mark. It means to shame a God, to dishonor God, who's seen as a Mediterranean patron. If I sin, if I shame or dishonor Don Vito Corleone, what does Don Vito Corleone have to do to me?
Kill you.
He has to order me whacked. That's what God is doing all over the Old Testament and the New Testament too, by the way. But then he kind of waives it. He says, no, I'm not going to do it. I have every right to do it, but somehow he doesn't do it. He doesn't have us whacked. How come? And we're left without, we're not given an answer. What we're presented with is a greater mystery, the mystery of Christ. Like, why the problem of evil? The Bible doesn't answer why there's suffering and evil. The Bible addresses the mystery of suffering and evil with a greater mystery that swallows it. The mystery of Christ. The cross and resurrection, right? Same thing here. And you have to understand that in the Bible, to dishonor God, that's the key. Dishonoring God, shaming God. So dishonesty, as our moral theology developed, and we got more introspective in the West, we started thinking about lying differently and dishonesty differently, right? And eventually that commandment, you shall not bear false witness. All the 10 Commandments. You know what the 10 Commandments are all about? In their literal sense. You know what the 10 Commandments are all about? Avoid blood feud. Avoid what? Blood feud. Because when you have a blood feud in the Middle East, it's game over. You want to know what the Beatitudes are about in their literal sense? And the antitheses, in the Sermon on the Mount. Avoid blood feud. Why no divorce? Because marriage is not the unity of two people in the biblical culture. It's the unity of two households of 100 people. You split that up, what happens?
Yes.
You got a blood feud very quickly in an agonistic culture. And everybody dies. No, we're not going to do that. Why don't you insult somebody? Because that escalates and you go to blood feud. What happens if you, in a henotheistic situation, you go beyond your God to another God? You've committed adultery with the other God, right? Now what does God have to do to you?
Kill you.
Right, so avoid the blood feud, don't do that. What happens if you dishonor the Sabbath? You dishonor God, right? Then God, what does he have to do? Because all theology is analogy, and all analogy is rooted in human experience, and all human experience is culturally specific. So all theology is anthropomorphic, anthropopathic analogy. That means that you're always making God into a human of a specific cultural type. You got it? So if I'm seeing God in the Bible, I'm seeing him in a Middle Eastern Mediterranean way, like meta personalities imagine what they see in their daily life. And if you dishonor such a personality, he has to whack you. He has to order a hit. That's just the way it goes. So you avoid that by not dishonoring. Honor, not obey. Honor your father and mother so that your life will be long, right? Watch this. You got two sons. One son's, you'll go out and work in the field. Aye, Father, I will. He doesn't do it. And then the other son, go out and work in the field. No way, I'm not going to do it. But later he thinks about it and he does it. Question, which of the two sons honored his father?
Either one.
The first one honored his father because he publicly said he was going to do it. Later on he didn't do it. That's not about honor. Jesus didn't ask which of the two sons honored. He said which of the two sons obeyed. The question is which of the two sons honored him? The first one. And then he went on and did whatever he wanted. He saved his father's face publicly.
Interesting.
Not your world, not my world, folks. We have someone here that it's a different world. It's a different world. Honor. Honor. Put it another way. Back to what we were saying about you shall bear false witness. That really means you don't dishonor your neighbor. It doesn't really mean you always tell them the truth. That later on became that spiritually as we evolved in this understanding. So don't ever lie. But that's not the Middle East. Are you kidding me? Don't ever lie. Who do people say that I am? Well, you're Elijah, John the Dunker, come back from the dead, or this other guy come back. Okay, I'm cool with that. That's deceptive, Jesus. Okay, but he's not an American, folks. Does he owe truth to people outside the in-group? But that's sin, Bill. No. He's not shaming God, folks. You got to read it in context, folks. Did Jesus ever shame God? Did he ever dishonor God? No. I don't think he also did morally repugnant acts or anything like that either. Okay, he didn't sin, but are we going to accept the incarnation is real and therefore situate him into a realistic modal personality situation? Or are we going to say, no, Bill, that... Like they did, when a bunch of context group scholars presented this to a group of Spaniards and a group of Italians and Greeks. These are all Mediterraneans, steeped in this culture, and also Middle Eastern people. And after the presentation was done, these 80 people get up to the context group and they say, what you say is true. But this doesn't apply to Jesus, Joseph, and Mary, because they're holy people. So you get the point? Holy people aren't really human. In these people's understandings. And that's a big problem we have. It's a Gnostic hangover we got to get rid of. Moving right along. Some may balk at the master for not employing independent and dispassionate investigation to see whether or not the steward is actually wasting money, because maybe they're just making up a BS story. But in an oral society, the rumor mill and gossip network are everything. In antiquity, gossip is how people discovered things about others. The master does not require absolute certainty whether or not his steward is cheating, because if the rumor mill says he is cheating, then the master's honor has been damaged, regardless of whether or not there's real cheating going on. It doesn't matter whether or not the steward has been falsely accused. It is the master who is in trouble. What the master wants to investigate is not his accounts, but where his honor stands in the village. It is essential that he and his family be recognized as good. Don Corleone, right? Bon sang. Bon
So
sang. How can you come to my house today when my daughter's to be married and ask me to be married? That's the Bible. When you think, Father God, understand that concept. Forget the criminality. Next, we're told that since the master has been dishonored by the actions of his steward, which are subject to public comment, the steward must act publicly in order to recover the master's honor.
Give them a discount on their debt.
You can't do that stuff in secret.
Right.
And really, there is little to no privacy in the Middle East. Like Joseph went to divorce her quietly. There's no quiet, nothing quiet in the Middle East. Quiet? Quiet? You mean less severe? Make her drink that mud drink in Numbers chapter 5. Maybe if she's innocent, she'll have babies later after she gets done puking. Honor is a very public reality. It must be known to the public, not something ever existing in private. Now, the dishonor of the master is known to the public, and that what the steward has to do is restore his master's honor in some way, and that has to be done in a very public fashion, a very dramatic fashion.